the second half. And I hope you all are fine with the recording of this panel. And we will have a brief questions which you already know from our mail. We will put those questions, you can put those questions and we can have a small discussion. And if you have any questions, you can raise your hand or you may put your comments in the chat. We also have Saloni, who is helping us with the logistic part of the panel. So yeah, I think we can start the session now. People can join later on. So thank you for joining us in this panel. If there is any post-pandemic city even exist. And I think we are kind of trying to bring certain, we have very interesting interventions, 6 interventions which kind of looks at digital ethnography from various lenses. And I think that is kind of quite relevant in today's context. And so there are a few things which has been discussed in the papers, which I'm sure that most of you have gone through the papers or the videos, which has been already uploaded in the DSA website. So I'm Raktim. I am a co-organizer of this panel. I am based at Development Planning Unit, UCL, and I'm located currently at London. So the thematic areas which kind of touch some of our presentations, which kind of clearly brought certain very interesting propositions, like how we can decolonize our understanding of development through this kind of digital ethnography. There are also a lot of gendered experience when some of the researchers were doing their research. And also how some of the presenters also highlighted how uneven topography in which the digital ethnography kind of operates, and the digital divide, inclusion and exclusion. And we have quite fascinating presentations which we'll be discussing more in detail in next few hours time. So I'll now leave the stage to Arunima, who is also co-organizing the session along with me. So Arunima, over to you.
Thank you, Raktim. Hi, everyone. It is really great to see all of the faces behind the presentations that were uploaded on the platform. And as reiterating what Raktim just said, we're very excited about the varied and very interesting presentations that have come forward. I am currently a PhD student. I am based at De Montfort University in Leicester. And I am working on the politics of heritage discourses in post-colonial Kolkata. So just to brief, more information, with little more information on that I started during the pandemic, my PhD. So my transition from a very ethnographic in-person on-site field plan has had to change into going into digital ethnographies and trying to work that around as well while I do my PhD. So I have a very vested interest in this panel as we go in. So I'm very interested in the discussions that we'll follow. As Raktim said, we have 2 dropouts, possible 2, 1 definitely, and we are not yet sure about the second one. But so which leaves us a little more flexible in terms of timings as we do the presentations. We will be following the format that is uploaded on the DSA platform in terms of who goes first in terms of how we proceed through the panel. And I will be timing our presentation. So we said initially 5 minutes. I think if it's okay with Raktim, we can keep it a little more flexible to like 5 to 7 minutes for all of you. Right, so if it is okay with Arya, then we can now start with her presentation, and I will just share the screen regarding the slide you mentioned, Arya. And I would also just request all of you to introduce yourselves as you start the presentation. So I am sharing the screen, and if any one of you could let me know if it's visible. Yeah.
Yes, I think it is visible. Thanks, Arnima.
Great. You just let me know.
Like what I said before, I think as I read out my notes, if you think you can just scroll down further, it's just a total of I think 7 or 8 pages, or a little more than that. So you can just like go one after the other. Yeah.
Yeah. Just let me know when you want me to scroll down. I'll do that.
Okay, sure. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you so much for organizing this panel. Thanks especially to Arnima and Raktim. For me, it was good to present because it was nice to sort of revisit the research and the paper that was written by the end of 2020. So a year later, it is sort of good to revisit the notes, especially now again that we are going through possibly a third or a fourth wave of the pandemic. I am I am unfortunately presenting from my phone because my laptop just ran into trouble like an hour before the conference here. So I'm just going to read through the notes that I've prepared, and we could take things as the discussion progresses. So I am, but I am also, I was a PhD student at New Delhi. I have finished and been awarded a doctorate at Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi. Currently, I'm engaged with a research project on regional history at the University of Calicut in Kerala. So going to the presentation just quickly. Ana Jana was the outcome of the Gendering the Smart City project that went on from 2018 summer till end of 2020. Gendering the Smart City project that investigated the current and historical relationship of gendered margins with the materiality of urban periphery and the digital spaces or landscape. The term Ana Jana in Hindi, drawn from Avajari, meaning coming and going, was a very common colloquial reference amongst the participants to refer to the research itself. It for them referred to the historical and the present day comings and goings, which includes the various modes of surveillance, evictions, resettlement, reclaiming that they experience in the city, with the phone and in the home. The gendered margins here refer to the millennials from a working class colony in the city who lived in the resettlement colonies that has a specific history in the making of India's capital at the turn of the century. They were all established after a violent phase of dispossession to slum evictions in the early 2000s as a run-up to New Delhi hosting the Commonwealth Games in the late 2000s. Arunima, you can go to the next slide. Yeah, just the other two, yeah. In our analysis, we use Mary Platt's idea of the contact zone to interpret an assemblage of writings, cultural expressions that were co-produced in the form of a Wikipedia page, a rap song, a physical and digital annotation of the neighborhood with a safety auditing app, all through the collectivity of a WhatsApp group. A rich repository of information and data knowledge was co-produced as we used Wikipedia, WhatsApp voice recording apps, selfies, and other apps in the mobile phone. The complexities of using digital mediums with young women, most of whom were also survivors of sexual and other kinds of historic violations, were taken in very seriously. The reality of digital divide in a space with no guarantees of any form of data protection, and I mean the fact that India has no law that sort of guarantees privacy and data protection, meant that we had to overwhelmingly rely on feminist ethics as well as privacy protection or regulations that is stated on the apps themselves or the platforms themselves. However, Ana Jana, in the final instance, we argue is a subaltern authorship that challenges power dynamics and decolonizes knowledge along the digital space and the analog sphere, including the young women's referencing of their own historical experience in the city through stories, jokes, emojis, selfies, and voice notes. And yes, for that, we really had to make sense of a lot of grainy, low quality images, patchy audios, and broken voice notes. So what we have sort of done methodically is we set up a safe space of a closed WhatsApp group with first generation learners from the resettlement colony. Almost all of them owned low quality phones with cheap data packs, meaning we constantly encountered crashing apps owing to low storage space. Most of them being students engaged in really low paying service sector jobs. Just excuse me. Sorry, we had somebody coming over in the room. I just had to respond. Yeah. So most of them, which meant that, a lot of them owned low quality mobile phones with cheap data packs, which mean that we constantly encountered crashing apps. Most of them being students engaged in really low paying service sector jobs also entailed that a lot of time there was no money for recharges. The fact that Smart City New Delhi suffered from lags in network and internet connectivity was also evident during our research, especially when women navigated basements, subways, and the Delhi metro. One of the participants did not also own a smartphone. Similarly, the fact that the research was not purely WhatsApp based and was complemented with focus group discussions and group activities heightened the sense of trust and safety that is felt in an otherwise, like what can otherwise be a random WhatsApp group. As the research proceeded, we realized that there was a pattern to the exchanges. During moments of frustration with broken physical infrastructure, to sharing the joys and fears of living in a big city and also an unsafe city, and also seeking help from this online group for jobs and education for sharing experiences of violence in the neighborhood, in the city, and in the home. This WhatsApp group was giving way to immense amount of knowledge and experiences being shared. Analytically, we conceive of this contact zone as a productive space of cultural production, expressions that reverse the power dynamics and by using the very tools, mediums of extraction to write the history, experience, and commentaries from the margin. I think we also argue that it was a form of intertextuality that is subverting the otherwise gatekeeping model so prevalent in knowledge production. So using as a means of knowledge and by reading as legitimate, I think it's something that we sort of later developed to acknowledge these forms of expression, especially like, especially the curating voice notes, selfies, and emojis, and so on, as very legitimate forms of knowledge production. So this was basically like a very modest attempt of using WhatsApp for what we actually initially called WhatsApp ethnography, and which I think the results in how various sort of there were various sort of cultural expressions emerged out of the research that we felt that it can be, if there are sufficient conditions, including like being a safe space, it can actually be a creative, participatory, and co-produced commentary on future urbanism as well as digital spaces from the margins. Lastly, as part of the project, we went back to the community during the second wave by the end of 2020. And I think I want to end with the note that our observations had sort of radically altered. Our observations had all changed drastically, given the fact that life had changed drastically after the pandemic. And I think there was a phrase that we used, which was like locked in and logged out. So locked inside the homes, but completely locked out of the outside world. That was the reality that we felt sort of best embodied the shift at the later stages of the research. I think I'll end it here, and we can take questions later on if that's how you would want to proceed. Yeah, thanks.
Brilliant, thank you, Arya. And I'll just first kind of put some of the comments that I had, and also a few clarifications looking at your abstract as well as the presentation. So it's very interesting the way you have used the analogy of Ana Jana, which kind of resembles a lot of interesting things, which is inside, outside, also receiving an internet signal or mobile connection or not receiving it, and which was really interesting to see that analogy, how it pans out. And that also reminds me of certain kind of things which you have also highlighted, like how broken words, grainy images kind of used as a way of expression, and which also kind of not so formal vocabularies for expression of certain kind of relations. And that's quite interesting to also see, which came out in your presentation. And I think Anajana also becomes what Boaventura kind of calls as a transnational translational contact zone. So where multiple identities and subjectivities kind of intermingle and contest with each other. So it was really fascinating to see that. However, I probably would ask you to clarification, if you can elaborate a little bit further. So one is how in your research you have dealt with the ethics of data and privacy, which was kind of, I think, very important for this kind of research. And the second question, which I would like to highlight is, you have mentioned in your presentation that there were also you haven't mentioned that, but in many cases in the post-colonial context or in any other context, probably we have seen when women uses mobile phones and technologies, so they are heavily surveilled by the male members of the family. So which kind of reestablishes certain kind of patriarchal norm within that house dynamics. So I was kind of intrigued to know whether you have kind of encountered some of those kind of surveillances which are reestablishing certain kind of patriarchal norm in the house while you were doing your research. Thank you.
Shall I respond or do we take more questions? I don't know.
I think, yeah, we can take a few more questions and probably you can respond to them collectively.
Yeah, that's fine.
Purnima, you are muted, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to know if anyone else has a question right now, or I can put forward mine in the meantime. And so just, this was a really interesting presentation and the project itself, Arya, so that was great to know. I had a clarification I wanted to know in terms of this term you have used in the presentation called the polycentric practices of through this method. So if you could just clarify a little bit of what you meant on that. One is that, and the second is, you know, these are very intimate and very nuanced ways, things that you were trying to get from your research participants. So what would you say was specific about the usage of WhatsApp, of mobile technologies that came out through this digital ethnography, which you wouldn't have gotten, say, with the use of having done this these interviews in person? What would you think came out of it more as the researcher? So if you could just tell us a little bit on these.
Kevin, do you have a question?
Yeah, so my question is, you mentioned how you had used focus groups along with the WhatsApp groups in order to kind of build trust and build rapport with the participants. My question is, beyond the building of rapport and the building of trust, were there any things that you were able to capture in the face-to-face meetings that were very difficult to capture on WhatsApp and vice versa? Were there things on WhatsApp that were easier to capture digitally that you were unable to really capture in person?
Are there any more questions or?
Arya, I think there are a couple of questions now. Atika has a question as well. Yeah, Atika, please go ahead.
Thank you, Arya. This was a very interesting presentation. My question to you is, I'm just wondering whether, you know, this form of, you know, WhatsApp group, whether it, you know, how did it actually discourage, or I would say encourage, the formation of multiple identities, which become very, very prevalent and dominant when we're using social chat rooms and social, digital spaces for interaction. So how does it, what do you think are some of the, harmful effects of having such digital spaces? So I'm taking a more critical stance towards, this research, playing the devil's advocate, perhaps, maybe here. Thank you.
Arya, I think you can start responding to some of the questions.
Yes, so I'll just go quickly since we also don't have so much time. I think in terms of data protection and privacy, we were actually, because the project was hosted at a university in London, we were actually bound by GDPR. But apart from that, I think as practice, as part of the research, because we were also 12 participants within a WhatsApp group along with others, and it was a closed WhatsApp group, so nobody else was sort of given access to the conversations within the WhatsApp group, and any sort of outward, research outputs that we had were, used by, we followed very basic ideas of just anonymizing participant names and anything that would identify their identity. You were right about something that struck us very strongly was the fact that, women are sort of surveilled more when they use mobile phones. And this is something something very interesting that happened through the course of the research was the growth of that collectivity of those set of people. So there were constantly incidences in the either in the WhatsApp group or like in the neighborhood itself, where like, the participants were reaching out to each other and being there for each other in case there was a lot of discontent with women's participation in the research or in this conversation. So I think it also led to that kind of collectivity, which sort of reversed this process. But having said that, I would say it is ever present. A lot of the times we realize that sometimes it is the family members, also male members, use phones because so this was something that we were constantly navigating. But I think we were able to navigate it in a way that it was healthy. And in terms of what we mentioned by polycentric approaches is basically looking at knowledge production itself, and especially the sort of hegemony of textual knowledge in a context like India, where caste has sort of forbidden access to knowledge itself. So curating these sort of multiple expressions or multiple forms of expression through in a WhatsApp group, which has all these like multimedia tools that one can access, their voice notes, their emojis, they're just like very easy to use forms of expression. And I think curating them and finding a pattern in them sort of was important. And that is what we essentially mean by a polycentric approach. Sort of keeping your eyes open to hints in all kinds of directions that these conversations would sort of lead to. Why WhatsApp? Definitely, there was a keen interest in understanding why and whether using WhatsApp has led to any sort of different hints. I think the initial thrust of the research was really about understanding access and digital divide, very like typical tropes that you would look at, especially while deploying this tool. But gradually we realized that this was a lot more complex, and of course, digital divide is an important sort of concept to look at. But using something like WhatsApp, which is the most used app, it sort of really helped as researchers, understand the location of the participants, including like the social location, but also as individual women. And I think that has been the greatest access that using WhatsApp has given us. FDGs, I think with this project, we were really able to sort of, I would say the most informative and aspect of this research was using WhatsApp. But FDGs was really important to sort of give materiality to the idea of the virtual safe space. And I think just occasionally meeting and doing activities together, including like mapping the neighborhood safety and sort of taking the same conversations that we would have in the WhatsApp group into the materiality of their neighborhood and of their immediate experiences. And I think that sort of acted in a very supplementary manner, complementary manner. And that was what I would want to highlight. Harmful effects, as much as I would say it was a highly democratic and it encouraged a sort of very participatory, co-produced set of knowledge creations, I would say that I think the fact that we cannot be oblivious or to the fact that the power equations within groups of women are going to reproduce even within a WhatsApp group. So that was one of the first challenges that we had to encounter. So people who were used to navigating more in the city or who had more friends would be most vocal in a WhatsApp group or during arguments in a WhatsApp group. So these are sort of power equations and different the marginal spaces of social locations that one had to constantly negotiate while conducting this kind of research. Yeah, I think I'm done for now.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, Arya. Quite lovely to see your contribution.
I think we can now quickly move on to the next presentation. So if both Molly and Uma are present, are you both present? And yeah? Okay, so I am. Yes. Great.
Sorry, we didn't know whose laptop is going to be better for it, so we were trying out both and like experimenting a little bit. Yeah, I hope we're both visible and audible. I'm just quickly going to share our slides, which don't have that much text on it anyway, but it ain't.
And I'll just let you know, I am timing, so we'll try to keep it 6 minutes now, and I'll send you a warning.
6 minutes, did you say?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, we already uploaded the full presentation that we had, so people can go and listen, and the whole text of that in PDF is also on the website of the conference. So we are actually going to do a very short version where we don't elaborate too much. Of course, we'll take it up during the question answers, just to take you through the main points. Basically, for both of us, this is sort of a passion project that we have been doing on the side alongside our own doctoral research. I come from a bit of policy, politics, and critical legal studies, and Uma is in urban studies in JNU. Yes, I just submitted my PhD. And and this is a passion project that we have actually, we started it with our hometown Siliguri in mind, and then it has expanded onto thinking largely about archiving small cities in India as a concept, and to reimagine how we theorize it and we think about it methodologically as a separate kind of urban space. You can again go to the website that we have started curating our living archive in and see what we are thinking about broadly, theoretically, and methodologically about these concepts. So basically, we call it the Kasbah Chronicles, and it is a living archive that we are building in present and the near past of what it means to be a small city or a town in India. And we have a few ongoing projects. The first one here is something I am leading, and the second is the one Uma is leading on. And we have been simultaneously doing a few podcasts as we collect data. And so a lot of this work would have anyway necessitated a lot of digital ethnographic methods because it's a living archive. So we would be losing out a lot if we did not take into consideration the visual and the videographic in actually archiving our narratives. But the pandemic necessitated an immediate move to the digital, even for the kind of fieldwork that we wanted to do in person for a set of certain stories. And we thought, while this is very much a work in progress and actually just starting out, we thought it would be good to actually shed some light on the takeaways that we've had in the last year and a half of experimenting with digital ethnography in processes that we thought would actually be happening in person because of the pandemic, and what it made us think primarily about two different kinds of things that we were enmeshing together. One that is digital ethnographic methods, and the other that is building of a live archive online. So we will start quickly. The first takeaway was around the idea of digital infrastructure and digital ethnography, where we saw in practice how the unequal digital access across these small cities actually obviously hampered our access to stories and people. But on the flip side, we realized that it actually added a very nuanced new layer to the kind of information we were gathering through our stories. So like the example that we gave in our presentation and the paper was a podcast, or well, actually an interview that we did with someone from Bongaigaon who was at the moment in Bongaigaon, and we were having video call originally that we were recording across 3 different places that we were in. And you could hear the crackle of the bad technology, you could hear the thunderstorms, and while we were talking about climate and infrastructure and urbanization in small cities. So it actually added a layer that got recorded digitally, which would not actually have been possible in person. So while the digital lack of access obviously is a methodological hurdle practically, it actually also gave us new ethnographic information that would not have been possible perhaps in person. So it adds a bit of nuance. And that was the example. The second is how we wanted to problematize actually using our experiments and our experience, the politics of prefixes, of what we mean as the pre and the post pandemic. This panel asked a question for us to think along the lines of what the post pandemic is methodologically when we are thinking about within the space of urban studies. But we actually thought about what the pre-pandemic even means, because linking again to our first point about digital access, in smaller cities and towns, there was already an inequitable digital access that was in place in the digital infrastructure, which then translates on to the pandemic and then the post-pandemic, which makes these prefixes something that needs to be further problematized in order to truly understand, capture the nuances that are within these stories. And finally, it brought up questions of contradictions of positionality for us. Like we mentioned right at the beginning, this was a passion project, and we started off with our hometown for collecting the stories because it is clearly something that we already knew. We already had established networks in there, and because we could not travel in person, we used the networks we already had in place to start our living archive. But obviously it brought in questions of where we stand as researchers and what this does to the ethnography. Again, linking to the digital access, whom we got to actually interview, which narratives we were platforming or which we shouldn't platform unless we have all of the sides of the narratives together in person. So for example, one of the key political intersections in this region would be along the questions of, on one side you have tea garden politics, and the other side you have military politics, because this is like a geographically and heavily securitized area, as well as a heavily dynamic trade area. And there are many political power networks in place over here, which do not get represented or platformed equally when using only digital ethnographic methods, and would need to be supplemented actually with in-person fieldwork in order to present something that is actually equitable in terms of power in any kind of way. And so to conclude, we would say that with these ruminations, we actually try to bring into shed some light on basically these two separate parallel running methodological tracks, one on living archives and the other on digital ethnographic methods. So the leap from ethnography to digital ethnography seems more imaginable perhaps than when you complicate it further with a separate kind of methodological track. And it was interesting to see the ways in which the two methods complemented each other, but also to see the places in which there were contradictions, which helped us actually reimagine how you would think about this theoretically as well as methodologically. I don't know how fast I went or how easy that was to follow, but I hope that was within 6 minutes. And I'm going to stop now and we look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Just here question. It also some very
Raktim, could you repeat? I think your voice is breaking.
Sorry, I'll mute myself.
Sorry.
Maybe that.
No.
Can you hear?
So your voice is breaking for some reason, so we're not able to hear you clearly. Could you maybe try to log in again? Or...
Yeah.
Arunima, you're on mute.
Yeah, we'll just wait for Raktim to come in, but in the meantime, we have very little time right now, but thank you so much. It's a super interesting project and quite great to see that you're doing something on the side while doing your PhD project as well. I will first open the floor to any questions. If not, then I can add in mine and then Raktim could also go once he joins back in. So I think Raktim is already here.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about the problem. Unfortunately, we have to navigate within all of this in the digital environment. So thanks, Molly and Uma, for your contribution. It was quite interesting to hear some of the provocation, what you brought together. And I think it also raises a very important question or an important aspect of doing fieldwork digitally, which includes the politics of listening as well as intimacy, because the way you kind of highlighted, you can hear the sound of the storms behind when you were doing the interview. So that is kind of brings a very different contextual element to doing the interview. So which was really, really fascinating to hear about. I just need I'll ask a very small clarification. Probably you can elucidate a little bit on the contradiction you kind of highlighted in your presentation between the product and the methods. So if you can elucidate a little bit on that, that would be really, really helpful. Thank you.
Do you want to go? Yeah, I can say, do you want me to answer?
I think it's better if you can, if you can take few of the question and then you can answer all of them together, that would be great. Thank you. Arunima?
Yeah, I think Kevin has a question. So would you like to go ahead?
Yeah. So my question is, you were saying how that, like the sound of the thunder and all that, that adds some kind of intimacy to the detail of the conversation that you're having. I was wondering whether that intimacy can also make people vulnerable. And the reason I asked this is because one time I was doing interviews with people in New York who were helping people who were applying for jobs and trying to like join these webinars. And one of the things that they brought up is that some people who live in vulnerable living situations don't want to be seen, don't want to turn on their camera during a webinar because they don't want people to see the environment that they're in. So I was wondering how you navigated that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I have 2 quick questions, but I understand we are running out of time. So I will maybe keep them for the end of the discussion, if that's okay. And you can just answer these.
You can just answer these 2 then. Okay. So first on the contradiction between the product and the method, why we raised that was because originally we were planning eventually that a lot of our archive would have digital components, but the work would be we were actually thinking about it quite conventionally, actually using archival methods as our point of departure into the academic scholarship, and wherein we thought simply about almost like maybe naively of a neutral platforming ground for all kinds of narratives coming in about the small city and the lived experiences of small cities, in order to see what builds up from it and then use it for further research. That was the point of plan. Yeah, the initial plan that we had. But when we started actually collecting that method digitally, suddenly we realized the practical implications actually of platforming some of these things, because the product that we had in mind originally was that of a live archive. And in order to do that, we were thinking obviously of a digital medium, which would be like a website where we were hosting different kinds of visual, videographical, audio, and otherwise textual narratives. That would have been our living archive as a product. But the methods we were employing automatically brought up then a lot of questions of power, positionality, which ones we were being able to get faster than the others. And therefore the archive would then have to wait in that sense, like as a product, it would have to be paused till we had enough on the other side, which would be the method. It would need to supply us with something more equitable in order to be able to platform it, because our own ethics, not just as researchers, but also as citizens in a democracy, then also played into.
And also that is how you fundamentally also become different from, say, a journalistic take on depicting a city or small city.
Right.
So we really did not want to go it, like, because that was not our initial plan. So we did not want to go down that way once we had already collected this information. So then that became like sort of like a pause we had to take and be like, okay, so we have so many of these, but how many of these can we, you know, platform, given that we cannot say what our position in all of this is. We had initially thought simply as a place to host stories or videos or podcasts from people we interview. So,
and some of it is actually quite prosaic as a practical constraint that we face, because we already announced that we had an archive before the pandemic. And then when you have told people that you have an archive and then you start doing this kind of ethnography, you don't want to move from it and say that we will not be doing the archive that you were doing. So we were already kind of tied by the constraints that we had put on ourselves. Yeah, if that makes sense, as the contradictions that came up. And then quickly on the question of the thunder and the vulnerability, actually that's a very interesting question, because not just that it makes people vulnerable, we agree, but also that practically it also meant that we had to make our video call go into voice calls in that moment, right? Because quite on literal practical levels, when you have that kind of layered interaction with the environment and the human subject in that sense,
the medium itself.
Yes, right. Exactly. But what we were trying to point out also was, so one thing is about the information that you're collecting as an ethnographer, and there you think about questions of vulnerability, but we actually also wanted to bring in what the technology itself is adding as information. So even if we were doing this in person and there was a thunderstorm, you would still take that into account in your ethnography of whether that makes people vulnerable, whether they want to bring you into their environment or not. But actually, we wanted to point out that the recording of that thing going on while this is happening, and that the technology actually plays a role in what kind of and to what extent the information is collected, actually adds to the information as a separate layer, not just as a nuance on the information you're already collecting from the individual, but as a separate layer of information on the digital infrastructure itself. So it becomes evidence almost, and not just a medium in itself. So I hope we answered the two questions. And
brilliant. Thank you, Molly and Uma. And I think that also sets the stage quite well with Priya and Vikas's work, which is also kind of answering some of these questions and nuances. So over to you, Priya and Vikas.
Just a quick interjection. Do we want to take this in the next session, because we are that starts from 1, because we have this session till 12:30 right now, and if that's okay with Vikas and Priya.
So actually we were in the first session itself, but I am actually fine with continuing
if the others are also.
Yeah, if others are all right with that.
Yeah, sure, that works.
Okay.
Because Saloni just left with the link to the next one. So I'm just trying to figure out if we can just start directly at 1 and do the remaining 3 presentations. If you could just give us a minute.
Sure.
Yeah. So, yes. Sorry.
So shall we continue from 1? Would it be fine?
Yeah, it's up to Priya and Vikas. Like, I think we can follow the DSA schedule that has been put in, and we can try to.
And we can have a little break also in between. So we may start at, we can start at 1. And anyway, we have, it's not very pressed in the next session. And so, yeah, we can go ahead. We can start again at 1. So see you at 1. You can use the same link. And
the link has been shared. It's a separate link.
In the, yeah. So please use that link. So thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you.
See you soon.